Sophia Grace Bennett trudged through the familiar gray monotony of her life. Sky above was a bleached canvas of clouds, and the streets were damp from an earlier drizzle. She walked briskly, her bag slung across one shoulder, her head down to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. She hated this part of the day, the commute from her office to her small, one-bedroom apartment. It was always the same. A blur of faceless crowds, the hum of traffic, and her earbuds pumping out some audiobook to drown out the world. The audiobook wasn't helping today. She paused it halfway through a chapter, sighing as she pulled open the door to her favorite used bookstore, a quiet sanctuary hidden on a side street. The bell above jingled faintly, and the smell of old paper and dust enveloped her. It was a place she'd discovered years ago and had since adopted as her refuge. Today, though, even the rows of mismatched shelves and the calming silence couldn't shake her restlessness. Sophia drifted between aisles, running her fingers along spines as she went. Her heart wasn't in it. Lately, nothing seemed to spark joy, not even the stories she used to lose herself in so easily. "Find anything interesting today?" came a familiar voice from behind the counter. Mr. Anders, the elderly shopkeeper, peered at her over his reading glasses. His wrinkled face creased into a warm smile. "Not yet," she admitted. "Just browsing." He nodded knowingly. "Take your time. Sometimes the right book finds you." Sophia gave him a small smile and continued browsing. It wasn't until she reached a dusty corner of the shop that her eyes caught on a striking cover. It was a hardcover novel, its spine a rich, deep red with gold lettering that glinted faintly, even in the dim light. The Enchanted Court, A Tale of Magic and Love. The title sounded cheesy, but the artwork on the cover, a group of impossibly beautiful people surrounded by magical auras, piqued her interest. She picked it up, flipping through the first few pages. The story was about a commoner girl caught in a world of royal intrigue and love triangles, or love pentagons, judging by the group on the cover. She smirked. "A little on the nose," she murmured, but something about it felt oddly appealing. Maybe it was the escapism it promised, a sharp contrast to the dull gray of her reality. She bought it without much thought. Back in her apartment, Sophia kicked off her shoes and tossed her bag onto the sagging couch. After a quick dinner of instant noodles and a shower, she curled up in bed with the book. The world outside her window was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a car passing by, and her small bedroom was dimly lit by the warm glow of a single lamp. The opening chapters of the novel were engaging enough, she supposed. The heroine, Celeste, was a down-on-her-luck commoner who stumbled into a magical kingdom and captured the attention of not one, but four devastatingly attractive men: a prince, a rogue, a sorcerer, and a knight. It was ridiculous, over the top, and oddly addictive. Sophia's lips curved into a wistful smile. "Must be nice," she muttered. "Life would be so much easier if I were the main character in a world like this. Magic, handsome men, and everything handed to me on a silver platter." Her fingers absently twirled a strand of her damp hair as she read further. The villainess, Lady Callista Ravencourt, made her first appearance a few chapters in. She was stunningly beautiful, of course, but cruel and manipulative. A textbook antagonist who existed solely to make the heroine's life miserable. Sophia rolled her eyes. Typical. Yet as the story unfolded, there was a nagging tension. Sophia found herself skimming parts to reach the spoilers she already knew from reading fan discussions online. Celeste's happy ending was guaranteed, but Callista? Her demise was brutal, orchestrated by one of the love interests. Which one? That detail eluded her, since she'd fallen asleep scrolling through the forums. The clock on her nightstand blinked 1:03 a.m. in glowing red numbers. She yawned, her eyes growing heavy as the book slipped from her grasp and onto the bed beside her. When she woke, the air felt strange, warmer, heavier. Her sheets were too soft, her bed's mattress too plush. A faint floral fragrance tickled her nose, mingling with the scent of polished wood and old parchment. Sophia's eyes snapped open. She wasn't in her room. She wasn't even in her apartment. A canopy of rich emerald fabric draped above her head, supported by intricately carved wooden posts. She sat up abruptly, the heavy silk of a nightgown, not hers, sliding against her skin. Her breath caught as her gaze fell on the opulent surroundings. Gilded furniture, towering bookshelves, and a mirror so large it covered an entire wall. Hesitant, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and padded toward the mirror. Her reflection stopped her cold. It wasn't her. The woman staring back was impossibly beautiful. Raven black hair cascading in perfect waves, ice blue eyes wide with shock, and a face sculpted like marble. Her trembling hands reached up, touching her reflection. Lady Callista Ravencourt. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. She hadn't just fallen into the story she'd been reading. She'd woken up as the villainess doomed to die. The mirror was cruel in its clarity, offering no escape from the truth. Sophia stared at her reflection, blinking rapidly as though her old self might appear if she looked long enough. But no, she was Lady Callista Ravencourt, down to the perfect arch of her dark eyebrows and the faint flush high on her cheeks. A soft knock at the door shattered her trance. "My lady?" came a voice from the other side. Feminine, polite, but tinged with nervousness. Sophia froze. She had no idea how to respond. The last thing she wanted was for anyone to suspect that she wasn't who she appeared to be. Swallowing hard, she stepped away from the mirror and cleared her throat. "Yes?" she managed, her voice softer and smoother than she remembered. Callista's voice. The door creaked open, and a young maid entered, her head bowed. She carried a tray laden with a delicate teapot, fine china, and a plate of pastries. Her uniform was spotless, and her movements were precise as she set the tray on a small table by the window. "Your morning tea, my lady," the maid said, glancing up briefly. Her eyes darted back down as though afraid to meet Callista's gaze for too long. Sophia felt a pang of unease. Was this fear typical? How did the real Callista treat her staff? She forced a nod. "Thank you," she said, attempting to sound composed. The maid hesitated. "Will you be requiring anything else, my lady?" Sophia's mind raced. How did one act like a noblewoman in a magical fantasy world? She had read countless books, but living in one was entirely different. She wanted to ask questions, but any slip might expose her. Finally, she shook her head. "No, that will be all," she said firmly. The maid curtsied and retreated, leaving Sophia alone once more. She turned to the tea, but made no move to drink it. Her thoughts were spinning too fast. She needed to think. "What do I know?" she asked herself, pacing the room. Callista was the primary antagonist in the Enchanted Court, a villainess renowned for her beauty and cruelty. Her schemes to ruin the heroine Celeste ultimately led to her downfall. Worse, her death was gruesome, at the hands of one of the heroine's 4 lovers. But Sophia didn't know which one, because she'd fallen asleep before that part. "This is insane," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. "Why me? Why not? Literally anyone else?" There was no answer, of course. But one thing was certain. She couldn't stay idle. If she wanted to survive, she needed to figure out 2 things: how to avoid Callista's original fate, and how to escape this world. Sophia approached the window, drawing back the heavy velvet curtains. The view took her breath away. Sprawling gardens filled with vibrant blooms stretched below, bordered by a dense forest. In the distance, the towers of the royal palace loomed, their spires piercing the sky like blades. It was beautiful, enchanting, and utterly terrifying. She wasn't Sophia anymore. She was Lady Callista Ravencourt, and her life depended on playing the role perfectly, for now. Sophia's first test came sooner than she expected. Her breakfast untouched, she sat at the writing desk by the window, nervously flipping through papers that had been left there. Letters, invitations, reports, all written in an elegant hand she didn't recognize but somehow knew was hers. She caught sight of one particular document, its contents making her stomach drop. It was a letter summoning her to the royal palace later that day. "Great," she muttered. "Thrown to the wolves already." The knock at the door startled her. This time it was a butler, informing her that her carriage would be ready in an hour. Sophia barely managed a nod as he left, her mind racing. She needed to look the part of Lady Callista, but more importantly, she needed to survive the scrutiny of the palace. The carriage ride to the palace was a blur. Sophia's gown, a deep emerald green with silver embroidery, was heavier than anything she had ever worn. The corset beneath it made breathing a chore, and her hair was styled into an intricate updo that felt precarious at best. As the carriage pulled up to the palace gates, she couldn't suppress a shiver. The palace was grander than anything she could have imagined, its ivory walls gleaming under the morning sun. "Lady Callista Ravencourt," the steward announced as she entered the grand hall. Heads turned. Nobles in elaborate finery whispered behind jeweled fans, their gazes sharp and assessing. Sophia's heart pounded, but she kept her expression serene, her steps measured and confident. The presence of the 4 love interests was impossible to miss. They stood near the throne, each more striking than the last. Prince Alaric, with his commanding posture and piercing gaze, was the first to notice her. His gray eyes narrowed slightly, but he gave a polite nod. Thane Vorthos stood stoically by his side, his armor gleaming. Lycian lounged against a column, his smirk mischievous, while Edric Thorne watched her with an unreadable expression, his violet eyes glinting. Sophia's pulse quickened. These were the men who might kill her. And now, she had to face them head-on. The Grand Hall was a battlefield of social expectations, and Sophia knew she was entering as a target. The whispers grew louder as she walked toward the throne, but she focused on each step, determined not to falter. The sound of her heeled shoes against the marble echoed in the cavernous space. "Lady Ravencourt," the king's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. He sat on the throne, regal and imposing, his crown glinting in the sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. "How gracious of you to join us." Sophia curtsied deeply, her movements careful and deliberate. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The king's sharp gaze lingered on her for a moment before he gestured for her to rise. "It seems you have been rather Reserved as of late, he said, his tone neutral but his words carrying an edge. My apologies, Your Majesty, Sophia replied. I have been preoccupied with personal matters. I did not mean to cause offense. The king gave a slight nod, but his expression remained inscrutable. Sophia's heart raced as she stepped back, taking her place among the gathered nobles. She felt the weight of their eyes, especially those of the 4 men who stood near the throne. Prince Alaric stepped forward first, his expression a mix of curiosity and calculation. Lady Callista, he said, his deep voice resonating in the hall. You honor us with your presence. Sophia inclined her head, masking her nerves. Your Highness, it is always an honor to serve the court. His gray eyes lingered on her, searching for something she couldn't identify. I trust you will continue to do so with diligence. Of course, she said, her voice unwavering despite the tension. Lysian was next to speak, his smirk widening as he approached. Callista, he drawled, deliberately forgoing formality. You look positively radiant today. Planning another grand scheme, are we? Sophia's breath hitched. Was that a joke? An accusation? She forced a laugh. I'll take that as a compliment, Lysian. It's good to see you've not lost your charm. His grin deepened, but the glint in his green eyes was anything but innocent. Charm is my greatest weapon, after all. Edric's violet gaze pinned her next. He didn't move, merely watching her from the shadows of the hall. Silence was somehow more unnerving than words. Finally, Thane stepped forward, his amber eyes steady and warm. Lady Callista? He said with a respectful bow. It is always a privilege to see you. Sophia returned the bow with a slight nod. Sir Thane, the honor is mine. The court session continued, but Sophia barely registered the proceedings. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what she knew of these men and how they might fit into her survival. Each of them had reasons to hate the original Callista, but their true motives were still shrouded in mystery. For now, she had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and her story could end before she had a chance to rewrite it. The court adjourned after what felt like an eternity. Sophia made her way out of the grand hall, relieved to escape the stifling atmosphere of judgmental stares and veiled hostility. Her plan to quietly retreat to her estate was interrupted by a subtle but commanding voice. Lady Callista. She turned to find Prince Alaric approaching, his stride deliberate. The hall was nearly empty now, save for a few guards and distant servants. Sophia's throat tightened, but she forced a calm smile. Your Highness? She asked, her tone polite but wary. Alaric studied her, his gray eyes scrutinizing every detail. You've been different as of late, he said. More reserved, less dramatic. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Perhaps I've learned the value of discretion, she replied smoothly. A lesson I should have embraced long ago. Alaric's gaze remained steady. Perhaps, he said, though his tone suggested skepticism. Regardless, it's uncharacteristic. Before she could respond, a sudden commotion echoed from the palace gates. Shouts rang out, followed by the unmistakable roar of a monstrous beast. The air grew charged, a faint hum of magic prickling against Sophia's skin. Alaric's expression hardened as he turned toward the noise. Stay here, he commanded, already striding away. Sophia hesitated. The sensible part of her screamed to obey, to remain where it was safe. But curiosity and an irrational sense of foreboding compelled her to follow. Sophia hesitated only a moment before gathering her skirts and trailing after Prince Alaric. Her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and excitement. The distant roars grew louder, punctuated by the clash of steel and the crackling of magic. Servants scrambled for cover, while guards rushed toward the commotion, their armor clinking with each hurried step. She followed Alaric through the palace corridors and out onto a grand balcony that overlooked the main courtyard. Her breath caught at the sight below. A massive beast, an amalgamation of claws, scales, and fiery red eyes, rampaged through the courtyard, scattering guards like leaves. Its tail whipped through the air, shattering a marble fountain into rubble. The sheer force of its presence made Sophia's knees weak. Alaric unsheathed his sword, its blade shimmering faintly with enchantment. He leaped into the fray, barking orders to the guards. Hold the line. Protect the civilians. His movements were swift and precise, each swing of his blade deflecting the monster's strikes. Sophia clung to the balcony railing, unable to tear her eyes away. The scene was mesmerizing, terrifying, and painfully real. This wasn't some choreographed fantasy battle. It was chaos, and lives were at stake. Just as the beast roared and lunged toward a cluster of guards, the air shifted. A sudden stillness fell over the courtyard, heavy and electric. The beast faltered, its head snapping toward the palace gates. The gathered guards murmured in confusion, but Sophia sensed it before she saw it. A presence so powerful it seemed to command the very air around it. From the shadows of the gate emerged a figure cloaked in black, his silhouette framed by an unnatural shimmer. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, as though the chaos around him was of no concern. The guards parted instinctively, their awe and fear palpable. Sophia's breath hitched. This had to be him, the enigmatic magician she'd read about in the novel. He had no official title, no public role, and yet he wielded power that rivaled kings. Few had seen him, and those who had spoke of him in hushed tones. The great magician raised a single hand, and the beast froze mid-attack, its massive form trembling under an unseen force. Sophia could feel the magic emanating from him even at a distance, an oppressive energy that pressed against her chest. The magician's voice was low and resonant, carrying effortlessly over the courtyard. "You've wandered into the wrong territory." The beast snarled, but could not move, its fiery eyes darting wildly. With a flick of his wrist, the magician sent a pulse of magic rippling through the air. The beast howled as its form disintegrated into ash, the remnants scattering on the wind. A stunned silence followed. The guards stared, weapons lowered, as the magician turned to leave without so much as a glance at the crowd. His cloak billowed behind him, and within moments he disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had come. Sophia's heart raced. This was no ordinary man. His power, his presence, it was overwhelming. But more than that, his mysteriousness intrigued her. Who was he? Why did he remain hidden, appearing only in moments of crisis? The novel hadn't given her many details about him, but now she had a name to put to the legend. Kael Lysandra, the elder brother of Alaric, born with magic so potent that even the high priests deemed him a dangerous enigma. Kael, she whispered to herself, her grip tightening on the railing. Prince Alaric's voice broke through her reverie. He was addressing the guards, his commanding tone steady despite the recent events. "Reinforce the gates and double the patrols. Ensure this doesn't happen again." Sophia turned her gaze to him, noticing the tension in his jaw as he glanced briefly toward the shadows where his brother had vanished. Alaric's expression was unreadable, but she could sense the weight behind his clipped orders. The courtyard began to clear, the guards resuming their posts, and servants scurrying to clean the debris. Sophia lingered on the balcony, her thoughts swirling with questions. If Kael was part of this world, then he might hold answers. Not just about her predicament, but about her survival. The mystery surrounding him only deepened her curiosity. She took a deep breath, her determination solidifying. She would find a way to learn more about Kael Lysandra. After all, if the most powerful magician in Elindra was tied to this story, he might very well be the key to changing its ending. Here's the beginning of Chapter 6, keeping in mind Sophia's journey toward trust, romance, and revealing her hidden powers. Chapter 6, Whispers of Magic. Sophia stood alone in her chambers later that evening, her thoughts tangled. The events of the day played over in her mind. Alaric's stern suspicion, Lysian's teasing smirk, the haunting presence of Kael, and the devastating power he had wielded so effortlessly. She let out a long breath and approached the window, gazing out over the moonlit gardens. The world felt vast and oppressive, but something about it called to her. A pull she couldn't explain. Her fingers brushed the cool glass, and a flicker of warmth coursed through her hand. Startled, she drew back, her eyes widening as a faint glow lingered on the pane before fading away. "Magic?" she whispered. Her pulse quickened. The sensation had felt natural, almost instinctive. She had no recollection of Callista having any magical ability in the novel, but this world clearly had its own rules. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "My lady," the butler announced from the other side. "You have a visitor." Sophia frowned. "At this hour?" She hurried to the door, smoothing her gown as she opened it. Her frown deepened when she saw Lysian leaning casually against the doorframe, his usual smirk in place. "Lysian," she said warily, stepping aside to let him in. "What brings you here?" He strolled in without waiting for an invitation, his sharp green eyes taking in her room. "I couldn't resist checking on our resident schemer after today's excitement. That performance of yours at court was almost convincing." She crossed her arms. "Almost? You came all the way here to insult me?" His grin widened as he flopped onto one of her chaise lounges, draping himself like a cat that owned the place. "Not at all. I came because I'm intrigued. You're different these days, Callista. The fire's still there, but it's tempered, controlled. Why is that?" Sophia's heart raced. Lysian was dangerous not because of his combat prowess, but because of his cunning. He saw through facades with alarming ease. She forced herself to stay calm. "Perhaps I've grown tired of unnecessary drama," she replied, her tone cool. "Even a villainess can evolve." His laughter was light, but carried a hint of mockery. "Villainess? Huh? I like that you're owning it. But it's more than that. You've changed, Callista, and I intend to figure out why." Sophia turned away, hiding the unease that flickered across her face. Lysian's perceptiveness was a threat, but it also presented an opportunity. He might not trust her yet, but he was the type to act on curiosity. If she played her cards right, she could use that to her advantage. "Do as you wish," she said over her shoulder. "But don't expect me to entertain your theories." Lysian stood, closing the distance between them in an instant. She tensed as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Oh, I intend to do more than theorize, Callista." Her breath caught. His proximity was intoxicating, his charm as dangerous as the daggers he undoubtedly had hidden on his person. She turned her head sharply, breaking the spell. "You should leave," she said firmly. "It's late." He stepped back with a mock bow. "As you wish, my lady, but I'll be back. Don't keep me waiting too long." With that, he was gone, leaving Sophia to wrestle with a storm of conflicting emotions. Lysian's interest was both unnerving and exhilarating, and she couldn't afford to let it cloud her judgment. She had bigger concerns to focus on. The following morning, Sophia awoke to the sound of bells echoing through the estate. She dressed quickly, donning a simpler gown that allowed for easier movement. The commotion outside suggested an emergency, and the knot in her stomach tightened as she descended the grand staircase. A steward rushed to her side. "My lady, the western fields are under attack by creatures of the abyss." Sophia's blood ran cold. In the novel, the abyss was the source of the world's greatest evils, birthing monsters that terrorized the land. But these attacks had been few and far between, usually handled by the kingdom's elite forces. "And Kale, summon the guards," she ordered, her voice steady despite the dread curling in her chest. "And prepare my horse." The steward hesitated. "My lady, with all due respect." "Do it," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "I won't stand idly by while my lands are ravaged." He bowed and hurried off, leaving Sophia to gather herself. The truth was, she had no idea what she was walking into, but she couldn't afford to seem weak. If she was to survive in this world, she had to prove her worth, not just as Lady Callista, but as herself. The western fields were chaos when she arrived, her horse skidding to a stop on the muddy terrain. Farmers fled in all directions as shadowy creatures lunged at anything in sight. Their forms were twisted and grotesque, with claws that gleamed like obsidian. Sophia dismounted, her heart pounding as she assessed the scene. The guards were struggling to contain the creatures, their weapons barely scratching the beasts' tough hides. Instinct took over. She stepped forward, raising her hand as the faint warmth from the night before flared to life. A surge of energy erupted from her palm, a brilliant light that struck one of the monsters and sent it howling into the air. The battlefield fell silent as heads turned toward her. Sophia's chest heaved, her own shock mirrored in the wide eyes of the guards. But there was no time to process what had just happened. The monsters were regrouping, and the fight was far from over. "Focus," she shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Form a line and drive them back." The guards obeyed, spurred by her authority. Sophia raised her hand again, this time summoning a barrier of light that held back the advancing creatures. Her mind raced as she channeled the unfamiliar magic, her body trembling under the strain. She was untrained, inexperienced, but somehow it felt right, like this power had always been hers. When the last monster fell, the guards erupted into cheers, their disbelief giving way to gratitude. Sophia staggered, exhaustion washing over her. A hand caught her arm, steadying her. She looked up to see Thane Vorthos, his amber eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You were incredible," he said, his deep voice carrying genuine respect. Sophia managed a faint smile. "I had to protect what's mine." Thane nodded, his grip firm but gentle. "You did more than that, my lady. You gave them hope." The aftermath of the battle left Sophia reeling. She had always been a passive observer of fantasy worlds in books, delighting in the drama and heroics from a safe distance. But here, in the flesh, her use of magic had turned her from an observer into an undeniable force. That knowledge filled her with equal parts exhilaration and dread. She stood amidst the battered field, the air heavy with the acrid scent of scorched earth and dissipated abyssal energy. The guards moved around her in a daze, casting her wary glances as they worked to secure the area. She could feel the weight of their suspicion, their fear, proof that her actions had only complicated her precarious position. Thane remained at her side, his presence steadying. He had said little since they left the battlefield, his expression thoughtful. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he broke the silence. "You've kept that talent well hidden," he said, his voice measured. Sophia hesitated, considering her response. "It wasn't intentional," she admitted. "I didn't even know I had it until today." Thane's amber eyes studied her closely, as though trying to decipher a riddle. "Magic like that doesn't simply appear. It's either innate or taught, and neither option aligns with what we know of you." She turned away, her gaze fixed on the charred remnants of the field. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Thane nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps not, but the others won't take this lightly. You've given them something to question and something to fear." Her chest tightened at the truth of his words. In the novel, Callista's downfall had been driven by mistrust and paranoia. Sophia couldn't afford to stoke those fires any more than she already had. "Thank you for your help," she said, her tone clipped. "I should return to the estate." Thane's brow furrowed. "Are you certain you'll be safe? The abyss doesn't release its grip so easily." "I'll manage," she replied, brushing past him before he could press further. The journey back to her estate was uneventful, but the unease from the battle lingered. Sophia's thoughts churned as the carriage rattled along the cobblestone road. Why did she have magic? Was it tied to her presence in this world? Or was it part of Callista's untapped potential? More importantly, what would happen when the court found out? She arrived at the estate late in the evening. The servants greeted her with a mix of relief and apprehension, their eyes darting toward the faint scorch marks on her gown. Sophia waved them off, retreating to her chambers as quickly as possible. Once inside, she leaned against the door, exhaling shakily. She needed answers, and the only way to find them was to uncover more about this world's lore and her place in it. The library, she decided, would be her next stop. Sophia found the estate's library eerily quiet, its towering shelves casting long shadows in the flickering candlelight. She ran her fingers along the spines of ancient tomes, selecting those that seemed remotely relevant. Titles like The Abyss and Its Terrors and The Forgotten Arts of Magic filled her arms as she settled into a corner, her determination outweighing her exhaustion. Hours passed as she combed through the texts. Most of them described the abyss as a chaotic force, constantly encroaching on the mortal realm. It was only held at bay by the combined efforts of powerful magicians, warriors, and artifacts. One passage in particular caught her attention. In times of great upheaval, the abyss awakens those with latent magic, marking them as its enemies or its champions. The distinction lies in their choices and the strength of their will. Sophia's fingers tightened on the book. Was that what had happened to her? Had the abyss somehow awakened her magic because of the threat it posed? The idea sent a chill down her spine. As she pondered the implications, a soft sound drew her attention. A faint rustle, like fabric brushing against stone. She looked up sharply, her heart racing. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice low but firm. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows between the shelves, a figure emerged. Sophia's breath caught as recognition set in. Cale Lysandre. His presence filled the room, as commanding as it had been in the courtyard. The candlelight barely illuminated his features, but his piercing gaze cut through the dimness. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. Cale stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "The same thing you are, I imagine. Seeking answers." She swallowed hard, clutching the book in her lap. "And what answers are you looking for?" His lips curved into a faint smile, though it held no warmth. "That depends. Why does the abyss fear you?" Sophia's pulse quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Cale tilted his head, his gaze never leaving hers. "Don't lie to me, Lady Ravencourt. I saw what you did today. That power isn't normal. Not for someone like you." His words stung, but Sophia refused to back down. "I didn't ask for it," she said, her voice steadying, "and I certainly don't owe you an explanation." Cale regarded her for a long moment before his expression softened, just slightly. "No, you don't, but if you wish to survive in this world, you do well to understand it." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sophia alone with her thoughts and the weight of his words. She exhaled shakily, her resolve hardening. She couldn't afford to remain in the dark any longer. If Cale was right, and she suspected he was, then the only way to control her fate was to embrace the power she had been given and learn to wield it. Sophia awoke the next morning to a heavy atmosphere in the estate. The servants scurried about with lowered heads, their hushed whispers barely audible. Even the sunlight streaming through her window seemed dimmer than usual. By the time she reached the breakfast hall, the source of the tension became clear. A letter lay on the head of the table, its crimson wax seal unmistakable, the crest of the crown. Her stomach twisted as she broke the seal and read the contents. "Lady Callista Ravencourt, your recent display of magic has caused great concern within the court. You are hereby summoned to the royal palace to explain the nature of your power and its origin. Failure to comply will result in immediate sanctions. Signed, High Chancellor Veridon. Sophia clenched the letter in her fist, her frustration boiling over. Of course, they wouldn't simply let her actions slide. In a world where trust in her was already fragile, she had handed them ammunition. Now, they would demand answers she couldn't provide. The journey to the palace was long and somber. Sophia tried to focus on the scenery outside the carriage, but her thoughts raced too wildly to appreciate the sprawling fields and quaint villages they passed. By the time the grand spires of the palace came into view, she had resigned herself to the inevitability of interrogation. Inside the throne room, the tension was palpable. The king sat at the center, his expression stoic. Beside him stood High Chancellor Veridon, a wiry man with sharp eyes that gleamed with suspicion. Several nobles were present as well, their whispers a constant undercurrent of noise. Sophia stepped forward, keeping her posture regal despite the unease gnawing at her. "Your Majesty," she said, curtsying deeply. "Lady Callista," the king said, his tone even. "Ah, you've caused quite a stir." "I acted to protect my lands and people," Sophia replied firmly. "Surely that warrants commendation, not suspicion." "Commendation?" Veridon scoffed, stepping forward. "Your power is unprecedented and unaccounted for. That alone is cause for concern. The abyss corrupts everything it touches. What guarantee do we have that you aren't compromised?" The accusation struck like a blow. Sophia's fists clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I've given no reason for you to doubt my loyalty," she said. "What I did was an act of defense, nothing more." "And yet," Veridon pressed, "you've hidden this power until now. That kind of deceit does not inspire trust." Sophia's gaze flickered to the assembled crowd. Many of them nodded in agreement, their expressions ranging from doubt to outright hostility. She realized with a sinking feeling that her words alone wouldn't be enough to sway them. "I suggest a test," Veridon said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "to prove her allegiance." The king raised a brow. "What kind of test?" "A task in service of the kingdom," Veridon replied. "There have been reports of abyssal creatures amassing in the Blackwood. If Lady Callista's intentions are pure, she will join the royal forces in eradicating them." Sophia's blood ran cold. The Blackwood was a notoriously treacherous region, known for its dense forests and dangerous inhabitants. Sending her there was tantamount to a death sentence. "Your Majesty," she began, but the king held up a hand to silence her. "I find the proposal reasonable," he said, his tone final. "Lady Callista, you will accompany the forces to the Blackwood. Prove your loyalty, and the court will consider this matter resolved." Sophia's jaw tightened, but she bowed her head. "As you command, Your Majesty." Sophia had little time to prepare. By the following morning, she found herself in the royal stables, flanked by a small battalion of soldiers. Prince Alaric was among them, his expression unreadable as he mounted his horse. "Are you certain you're up for this, Lady Callista?" he asked, his tone neutral but tinged with doubt. Sophia met his gaze, her chin held high. "I don't intend to disappoint." Alaric studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then let's not waste time." The journey to the Blackwood was arduous, the dense forest looming ever closer with each passing hour. By the time they reached its edge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced ominously among the trees. "Stay close," Alaric instructed as they dismounted. "The abyss thrives in places like this. It's easy to lose your way." Sophia followed the group into the forest, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with tension, the faint rustling of leaves and distant growls setting her nerves on edge. She could feel the abyssal energy pulsing around them, a dark and oppressive force that seemed to seep into her very bones. As they ventured deeper, the first attack came without warning. A creature lunged from the shadows, its grotesque form barely discernible in the dim light. The soldiers reacted swiftly, their weapons clashing against the beast's claws. Sophia hesitated for only a moment before raising her hand, summoning the same light magic she had used before. The energy surged through her, illuminating the area as it struck the creature, sending it reeling back. Another beast emerged, then another. The group quickly found themselves surrounded, their formation breaking as they struggled to hold the line. Sophia's magic flowed instinctively, each burst of light striking true, but the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. Fall back! Alaric shouted, his sword flashing as he cut through a snarling beast. Sophia stumbled, the strain of using her untrained magic taking its toll. She raised her hand to cast another spell, but the energy faltered, her vision swimming. Just as she thought the creatures would overwhelm her, a wave of dark energy swept through the clearing. The abyssal beasts howled in pain before collapsing into piles of ash. Sophia turned, her breath hitching as she saw him. Cale Lysander stood at the edge of the clearing, his cloak billowing in an unseen wind. His violet eyes glowed faintly as he lowered his hand, the remnants of his spell dissipating into the air. "You again," she breathed, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Cale approached her, his expression unreadable. "You're lucky I arrived when I did." Sophia bristled at his tone. "I didn't ask for your help." "No," he replied, his gaze piercing. "But you need it." The tension in the clearing was palpable. Sophia stood frozen as Cale's violet eyes bore into her. Around them, the remnants of abyssal beasts smoldered, the faint acrid scent lingering in the air. The royal soldiers watched Cale warily, their unease evident in the way they gripped their weapons. Only Alaric stepped forward, his face tight with a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. "You didn't need to involve yourself, brother," Alaric said, his tone clipped. Cale's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "And leave you to fumble your way through an abyssal ambush? I thought better of you, Alaric." Sophia blinked. "Brother?" She hadn't considered the familial resemblance until now, but the similarities were undeniable. Both men had the same sharp features, the same regal air. But where Alaric's presence was commanding and methodical, Cale's was wild and unpredictable. "This was a royal matter," Alaric replied, his words cold. "You've overstepped." Cale waved a dismissive hand. "Spare me the politics. The Abyss doesn't care for your hierarchy, and I've no patience for bureaucracy when lives are at stake." The exchange bristled with tension, and Sophia half expected swords to be drawn. But Cale's attention shifted to her, his piercing gaze scrutinizing her from head to toe. She felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. "And you, Lady Callista," Cale said, his voice softer but no less commanding. "What exactly were you hoping to accomplish here?" Sophia straightened, refusing to let his presence intimidate her. "Protecting the kingdom. Isn't that what you claim to do?" Cale's smirk deepened, though there was no humor in it. "Bold words for someone whose magic is raw and barely controlled. You're lucky the abyssal creatures didn't tear you apart." Sophia clenched her fists, heat rising to her cheeks. "I managed fine before you showed up." "Did you?" Cale asked, arching a brow. "Because from where I stood, you were seconds away from collapse." Sophia opened her mouth to retort, but Alaric interjected. "Enough." His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This is neither the time nor the place for this." Cale stepped back with an exaggerated shrug, though his eyes never left Sophia. "As you wish, brother, but don't expect me to clean up your messes indefinitely." The group resumed their march through the forest, with Cale walking a few paces behind. Despite his apparent disinterest, Sophia could feel his eyes on her, his presence an unsettling shadow. The soldiers whispered among themselves, their fear of the magician as tangible as the darkness pressing in around them. "Does he always make a habit of appearing uninvited?" Sophia whispered to Alaric when they stopped for a brief rest. Alaric shot her a sharp glance. "Cale does as he pleases. He always has." "Convenient," she muttered, earning a look that was equal parts warning and agreement. As the group pressed on, the forest grew darker, the air heavier. Sophia could feel the abyssal energy thickening, its oppressive weight gnawing at her resolve. The guards' footsteps faltered, their unease mirrored in their tense postures. "This isn't right," Thane muttered, his voice low as he scanned the shadows. "The energy is too concentrated." Sophia's stomach churned. She could feel it too, a pulsing, malevolent force that seemed to grow stronger with every step. "It's drawing us in," Cale said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. He stopped, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. "A nexus of abyssal power. That's what's causing this." "A nexus?" Alaric frowned. "There's no record of one in the Blackwood." "Records are rarely accurate when it comes to the Abyss," Cale replied. He turned to Sophia, his expression unreadable. "You feel it, don't you?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "It's overwhelming." Cale studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "Good, then you'll understand why we can't ignore it." Alaric stepped forward, his tone firm. We're here to eliminate the creatures, not investigate uncharted phenomena. Our priority is ensuring the safety of the kingdom. And ignoring the Nexus will only invite more danger. Kale shot back. If we don't deal with it now, the abyss will continue to grow stronger. The two brothers glared at each other, their disagreement threatening to derail the mission. Sophia, sensing the impasse, took a step forward. Kale is right, she said, surprising even herself. If this Nexus is the source of the abyssal creatures, then destroying it will ensure they don't return. Alaric turned to her, his brow furrowed. This isn't your decision to make, Lady Callista. No, she agreed, meeting his gaze. But it's the logical choice. Alaric's jaw tightened, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. Very well, but we proceed with caution. Kale smirked. How uncharacteristically sensible of you, brother. Alaric ignored him, turning to the soldiers. Form a defensive perimeter. We move as one. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. Sophia's magic hummed faintly beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the power she barely understood. She clung to it like a lifeline, knowing it might be the only thing standing between her and death. When they reached the Nexus, it was unlike anything Sophia had imagined. A swirling vortex of dark energy pulsated at the center of a clearing, its tendrils stretching outward like skeletal fingers. The ground around it was blackened and cracked, the trees twisted into grotesque shapes. Sophia shivered, her breath visible in the frigid air. What is this? She whispered. The heart of the abyss, Kale replied, his tone uncharacteristically solemn. Destroying it won't be easy. Alaric drew his sword, his expression grim. Then we'd best start now. As the group prepared for battle, Sophia felt a surge of determination. She might be the villainess in this story, but she wasn't going to let that define her. Not now. Not ever. Let me know how you... The clearing was deathly silent, save for the faint hum of the Nexus at its center. The soldiers formed a tight circle around it, their weapons drawn and their faces pale. The swirling darkness of the Nexus seemed to pulse in rhythm with the pounding of Sophia's heart. Kale stepped forward, his presence commanding. We'll need to destabilize the energy field, he said, his voice low but clear. Anything less, and it will simply reform. And how do we do that? Alaric asked, his sword glinting faintly in the dim light. Kale's eyes flicked to Sophia, his gaze piercing. With magic. Strong magic. Sophia stiffened, her palms tingling with the memory of the light she had conjured before. You mean me? Kale nodded, his expression unreadable. Your power is raw, but it resonates with the Nexus. You can weaken it. I'll handle the rest. She's untrained, Alaric protested. You're asking her to risk everything on instincts. Instincts are better than hesitation, Kale replied sharply. Unless you have a better plan? Alaric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sophia took a shaky breath, stepping forward. I'll do it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Tell me what to do. Kale studied her for a moment before nodding. Focus on the light within you. Let it grow until it becomes a weapon. Aim for the core of the Nexus. Sophia swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she raised them toward the swirling vortex. The dark energy seemed to resist her, pressing against her mind like a vice. She closed her eyes, searching for the spark she had felt during the battle. At first, there was nothing. Panic threatened to consume her, but she forced herself to breathe, to concentrate. Slowly, warmth spread through her chest, blossoming outward until it filled her entire being. The light was faint at first, but it grew stronger with every pulse of her heartbeat. When she opened her eyes, her hands glowed with radiant energy. The soldiers murmured in awe, but Sophia barely heard them. She focused on the Nexus, aiming for its heart. Now, Kale urged. Sophia unleashed the energy in a burst of blinding light. It struck the Nexus with a deafening crack, and the vortex writhed violently, its tendrils lashing out in all directions. The force of the recoil sent Sophia stumbling, but Kale was there, his hands steadying her. Hold your ground, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. We're not done yet. The Nexus fought back, a surge of dark energy rippling through the clearing. The soldiers braced themselves as shadowy creatures emerged from the vortex, their forms more grotesque than the ones they had encountered before. Defend the perimeter, Alaric shouted, his sword cutting through the first wave of attackers. Sophia gritted her teeth, summoning another burst of light to fend off the creatures. Her magic was clumsy, barely controlled, but it was enough to hold them at bay. Kale stood beside her, his movements precise as he cast a spell that sent a wave of dark energy crashing into the Nexus. The vortex howled in defiance, its form beginning to fracture. "We're close!" Kale shouted. "One more push!" Sophia's limbs ached, her vision blurred, but she drew on the last reserves of her strength. She raised her hands again, channeling every ounce of power she had left. The light surged forward, meeting Kale's magic at the Nexus's core. The vortex shrieked, its tendrils collapsing inward as it imploded in a burst of light and shadow. The force of the blast knocked everyone to the ground, the clearing engulfed in silence once more. When Sophia opened her eyes, the Nexus was gone. The clearing was still, the air no longer heavy with abyssal energy. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the effort. Kale stood a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the spot where the vortex had been. His expression was unreadable, but there was a faint flicker of something, satisfaction, perhaps, in his eyes. "You did well," he said without looking at her. Sophia blinked, surprised by the rare note of praise. "Thank you." Alaric approached, his sword sheathed, but his face tense. "The Nexus is gone, but the Abyss won't stop here. We need to strengthen our defenses." Kale nodded, his demeanor shifting back to its usual aloofness. "Then you'd best prepare. This was only the beginning." Sophia watched as the brothers exchanged terse words, their dynamic as tense as ever. She felt a strange sense of accomplishment, though it was tempered by exhaustion and uncertainty. The battle was over, but the war against the Abyss had only just begun. As the group prepared to leave the forest, Kale lingered near Sophia. His presence was unsettling, but not unwelcome. "You've unlocked something powerful," he said quietly, his violet eyes meeting hers. "But power without control is dangerous. If you survive, you might just become someone worth reckoning with." The words hung in the air as Kale turned and walked away, his cloak billowing behind him. Sophia's chest tightened, a mix of pride and unease swirling within her. She had survived another trial, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the true challenges were yet to come.